Everyone, we are coming back to the conversation of, is purchasing a home a good investment? And we're going to look at it through the lens of the first-time home buyer. And I promise you, this episode with Scott and Mindy from Bigger Pockets is going to be both informative and likely full of really bad puns. Welcome to the ultimate crowdsourced personal finance show. This is Choose FI.
You're listening to Choose FI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. Choose FI, your home for financial independence online.
All right, everyone, today we're going to be talking about at least one version of the American dream, which is that beautiful middle-class home in a wonderful neighborhood and a white picket fence. And for many people, circa 2008, 2009, that home became, instead of an American dream, it really became a financial nightmare, one that people were underwater for, maybe over 10 years. And in this kind of contrarian financial independence community that we have, people rightly, very rightly so, started looking at the numbers and saying, I don't know if homeownership is really the right decision for everyone, even though I always knew from a child that at some point I was going to purchase a home. I want to push back on that. In fact, when I look at people that were purchasing in 2008, 2009, it was probably in some cases, obviously not every, it was maybe the worst financial mistake of their adult life. It's one they're still recovering from. So it's an ongoing debate. It's one that's absolutely fascinating. And we're going to be looking at that through the lens of a brand new book from Bigger Pockets, and specifically Scott and Mindy, who are on the call with us today, called First Time Homebuyer, the complete playbook for avoiding rookie mistakes. Now, many of you have already purchased a home, and I could see you for a second saying, I probably know how to buy a home at this point. And I would just push back on that and say, I got so much information from this book that if I were ever going to purchase another home, I would rework my entire process with the framework that they laid out in mind. They were meticulous. They thought of everything and they did it in a very engaging and sometimes corny way, which is their whole shtick. And I love it. Anyways, we'll get right into that. But to help me with this, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Jonathan, I am doing quite well. And yeah, you really hit it on the head. The book is fantastic. It honestly is. I actually wrote a little blurb for it, and I said, it's a rare treat when a book helps you see the world more clearly. And First Time Homebuyer does just that. Instead of platitudes surrounding homeownership, like it's the American dream or it's your biggest investment, Scott and Mindy give a real world masterclass on what to truly consider when purchasing your home. And I just think they nailed it. I think they talk about, what can happen when you buy the largest, most expensive home possible. That, as they say, little do they know they're setting themselves up for a decades-long slog of financial struggle and worry. Whereas a smart home buying decision will not only give you a place to live, but also offer flexibility, financial stability, and the chance to recognize an increase in that home's value over time. And isn't that what we all want? A smart home buying decision. So with that, Scott and Mindy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you both. It's been way too long since I saw you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
We are excited to have you here, guys. It's going to be a lot of fun. Why don't we just kick this off with the ultimate question that's in everybody's minds? Scott, Mindy, answer this in whatever order you choose. Is purchasing a home a good investment?
Maybe.
Ooh.
Next question.
Trick question.
Move along.
How would you rework that question? Was that the right question?
Buying a home or housing is an expense. You have to pay to live somewhere unless you're, getting free housing of some sort, in which case you're better off continuing that than buying a home or renting. But housing is an expense. The more you buy, the less wealth you will have, the more you're spending, right? And that's true whether you buy the bigger, nicer, more expensive home or rent the bigger, nicer, more expensive apartment, condo, or whatever with that. So the less you buy, the better off you are. Therefore, it's an expense, in my opinion, not an investment. And so I think if you reframe your whole strategy around that, that's where it's like, how much house can I afford? Well, there's a limit to what your lender is going to pre-qualify you for, but it's about how little I can spend to meet my lifestyle needs. And what's the best financial decision to get those lifestyle needs? Is it renting? Is it buying? I think there's a nuanced decision behind that and a lot of math that comes behind that.
Well, maybe we can touch on that a little bit in this particular episode. But Mindy, isn't that interesting that the question that we start off when we start thinking about buying a home is how much can I afford? And we look to a lending calculator to give us that data.
I am a real estate agent. I work with clients all the time. And I find myself stopping myself from asking, well, how much can you afford? Because I feel like I just wrote this book talking about don't spend every dime. It is very disingenuous for me to then reach out to my clients and say, hey, you should spend every dime you have on a house. So I ask them what price range they want to be in. I invite them to reach out to a lender and talk to them about not only how much they're going to be spending, but what their payment is going to be. What kind of home are they looking for? Do they want to do anything to it, or do they want a perfect house when they move in? You asked, is your home an investment? My home is a great investment. I need a place to live. And I am making money while I'm living here because I buy really dumpy houses. I move into them, I fix them up, I make them look beautiful, and then I sell them to somebody who doesn't want to buy the dumpy house. They want the beautiful, perfect house. So my home is an investment, but I'm working at it. I am forcing the appreciation.
So Mindy, in your case, this is very purposeful as basically a real estate investor's mindset. But what about if you took that question, is your home an investment, for just the average person who bought a house at market value and spent a significant portion, as Scott said, housing is an expense, a significant portion of their income towards this single family home that they're living in, right? And intend to live in for X number of years. Like that person who bought at market value in a nice part of town, should that person consider this an investment?
No. And I actually had a conversation with Jim Collins about this because he came out several years ago and said, your home isn't an investment. I'm like, I made money on every house I ever bought. So what are you talking about? But a deep conversation with him revealed that he is talking about that, Brad. He's talking about that buyer who's buying the nice house, the perfect house, the already fixed up house that doesn't have any room to really force the appreciation. Appreciation will generally, but not always, happen over the course of your home ownership time period. If you buy a house in 1974 and then you go to sell it in 1990, it's going to sell for a lot more than you bought it. You didn't really necessarily force any appreciation. It was the product of the market around you. And outside of the exact market that we're in right now, which is seeing double-digit appreciation this year over last year's double-digit appreciation, markets really tend to appreciate what's got 3 to 8%, like depending on a really, really good year over year. So you're not seeing a ton of increase in your home's value over the course of, just a couple of years. So if you're planning on buying a house, living there for a couple of years and then selling it, unless you're going to go the Mindy approach and really force the appreciation, it's not going to give you a lot when you sell it. And in fact, you could end up losing money when you sell it due to closing costs and things like that. So I wouldn't say the average regular Joe or Jane buyer should think I am going to buy a house. It's going to be a great investment, because it's not an investment. It's a place to live. So that regular Joe or Jane who is considering their house as an investment, in a lot of cases, in most cases, that's their only investment. They're not investing in their 401k. They're not investing outside of a tax advantaged account. They're not contributing to a Roth IRA typically. And I know there's people that are listening that's saying, I did all of that. Well, yes, but that's not typical. I mean, how many people can't, 40% of Americans can't even swing $1,000 emergency repair or something like that? For a lot of people, this is their only investment. And like I said before, back when you bought in 1974 and then you sold in the 90s, wow, I made $200,000. Yeah, but what would you have made if you had put some money in the stock market? Like a couple of $1,000s in 1974, cashed out in 1990 would be a lot more than a couple $100,000.
Yeah, there's two things around the investment part for the house exactly that makes it a bad investment relative to some alternatives. But there's a lot of nuance behind this that gets really complicated. So cut me off if I'm getting too complicated with this. But when you buy a home, you got to pay about 1% to 2% in closing costs, depending on your area. If you're in a low-cost living area, it might be 3% of closing costs. So if it's a $400,000 home, you're probably paying $8,000 in closing costs between the loan, the inspection, appraisal, title, all that kind of good stuff. And then when you go to sell the property, you would have to pay about 8% in closing costs. That includes both the sell side, the listing agent, and the buyer agent. The seller typically pays both of those. I can't state the specific commissions for the agents because there's some rule about, that being monopolistic, but generally you can call it 5, 6, 7% you're going to pay between those two agents in most markets around the country. And so with that, people don't think about that. So that's 10% of your property's purchase price that's out the door the moment you buy it. All of that is sunk cost into it. So you put down 10% on a $400,000 home, that's $40,000. You're out $40,000 if you turn around and sell it tomorrow. And so that's the key piece of the math that's hidden behind the scenes with this that makes you might have equity in your property, but to realize that equity by selling the property, you're going to have to pay a ton of closing costs on the sell side. So with that, the moment you close on your property, you're down a lot, and you have to allow appreciation. If you're not going to improve the property the way Mindy does and force it, you have to allow appreciation to carry you back over time. And yes, when you pay a mortgage versus rent, all else equal, you are benefiting from appreciation. You are slowly amortizing your loan. Those things are working in your favor. And you're getting here's the complicated math bit. When I put down 10% on a property and that property appreciates 3.5%, my return is 30.5% the first year. Does that make sense? Because I'm levered 9 to 1. With that, I have 10% in the property. Every year, as my equity stake gets bigger, if I own the whole place in cash, I get 3.5%, which is a lousy return, right? So you're riding this yield curve down the whole way while you own your property. And if you can envision this, I know I'm getting into advanced calculus with this, but that's what's going on here. Is the first couple of years you're getting a great return, but that's all offset by these closing costs. And then over the long period of time, your returns actually begin to stink relative to alternatives like the stock market, where you might be able to get 7, 8, 9, 10% on an average basis. So after 30 years, you might put $1 million into your property and have $1 million property. That's great. But if you put $1 million into an alternative investment, you might be way better off over that same 30-year period. And so that's a little bit of the hint at the math behind this. We have a spreadsheet that goes into all that. I think it's at biggerpockets.com/home buyer bonus for that spreadsheet. So we'd like you to buy the book to get the bonus, but I think it's just available even if you don't. So go check it out.
Yeah, Scott, that's interesting, talking essentially about opportunity costs, right? What would you have done otherwise, right? And if you had invested in the stock market over those 30 years, you're saying an alternative investment, but, just low cost index funds, for instance, and you're expecting on average 8% annualized returns, that's a pretty significant opportunity cost over, like you said, that potential 3% kind of inflationary rise in your home. So it's a very interesting way to look at it. And it's important that people understand that. I know the math does get a little complicated, but just the concept. And also, like you said, you're walking in and essentially 10% of your home price on both the front side and the back side is burned in a fireplace, right? That is straight expense. So you're down that. You cannot lose sight of that. You're already in the hole. And that's hard-earned money, right? That is in the hole. So just wanted to point out those two things. My quick question for you is, do you have a rule of thumb then on the shortest time period that if somebody was saying to you, hey, Scott, we're thinking about moving to this new town, but I think we might only live there for 2, 3, 4 years, something like that. It's possible we'll live there longer, but we're not sure. Should we even consider buying, or should we just rent? Is there a rule of thumb that people could consider?
Well, it comes down to what's the break-even point, right? So if we assume a 3.5% appreciation rate, and I love 3.5% appreciation because that comes from what's called the Case-Shiller index. Home prices are inflating at a much faster pace than that because new homes tend to be bigger, nicer, better, and those new home construction prices rise typically at a rate of 5, 6, 7% per year. But what you're looking at is if I buy this home and resell it later, what's it going to be worth? And national average there is 3.5%. Obviously, it's different in Denver compared to Detroit, for example. And so you got to be able to nuance that with your local market. But if we assume a 3.5% appreciation rate, you can tell I can get nerd out about this math stuff.
That's why I love having you on, brother. Just keep it coming.
If we assume a 3.5% appreciation rate and the closing costs that I just described, your break-even point, and depending on the cost to buy versus rent, is probably going to come in a window of about 5 to 7 years. If the appreciation rate is 12% per year, that break-even point is going to come a heck of a lot faster. So if you're banking on 12% appreciation continuing for the next couple of years, then a lot of people are making money buying when just because the price increases to completely offset all those closing costs in year one. I mean, that's incredible what's going on in the last year or two and what appears to go on this year. But if you assume 3.5%, it's going to be 5 to 7 years. And that's going to be depend on a whole host of factors. But there's also a trick question there because you do not have to live in the property for longer than 5 to 7 years to make this work. You can just own the property for more than 5 to 7 years. So for example, if you move out of the property and keep it as a rental, we're bigger pockets folks over here, that would significantly increase the desirability of buying versus renting if you bought a place that would make sense as a rental after you moved out, for example. So that's where it comes down to like these exit strategies can really make a difference in informing your decision about whether to buy versus rent.
We're going to spend a lot of time there because I think that conversation is a really important piece of this. And it's honestly why I love the fact that you and Mindy were the ones that put this book together, that this was something that because Bigger Pockets is largely known for real estate investing. So imagine you're leaning on your friend that's a real estate investor who knows all the ins and outs of making sure you don't lose money on housing and say, I'm buying a house for myself. Like, can you give me, that inside scoop on what I should be looking for? That's what I got from this book. Now, before we go into exit strategies and rent versus buy variables, which I think are really valuable, I wanted to actually go back just for a second to how much house can I afford versus that this is your only investment. It's not a good investment, it's your only investment. And to me, one of the best illustrations of that really helped pull that together to me was actually, Scott, another book that you wrote. That's another really one that I love a lot, Set for Life, where you talked about the pie chart. And yeah, I know, get a little plug there. I wasn't expecting that, but I do genuinely love that book. And I just wanted you to illustrate for people how when you start with the question, how much house can I afford? And you rely on the real estate lending calculator to give you that answer, you do put yourself in a situation where after taxes, you have nothing left. House poor. Can you help us establish, what percentage when this is going to your home, it's going to be your only investment?
So great. I think that there's a complicated, nuanced answer to that. So I'll try to answer that as succinctly as I can. In a place like median incomes differ around the country, as do home prices. In a town like in the Midwest, median incomes are going to be lower than they are in San Francisco. The cost of food, going to the grocery store, getting gas is not going to be as different as the income differentials, median income differentials, and the home price differentials in those areas. So in a place like the Midwest, you might be able to spend 20 or 30% of your income on housing, and all the other goods like grocery stores is going to be $400. In San Francisco, the grocery store might be $450. I don't know. But what I'm trying to point out is that in a place like San Francisco, where the median income is much higher, if it costs $30,000 to live in Memphis and $35,000 to live in San Francisco, and the median income in Memphis is 42, and the median income in San Francisco is 85, then $50,000 can go towards housing in San Francisco, and $12,000 can go to housing in Memphis, which is why people are like, oh, housing prices are tied to median incomes, and that's when they're out of whack, things are crazy, and that's why this market's overpriced. No. All disposable income over that level that's needed for your day-to-day life and a typical lifestyle can go towards the scarcest asset, which is housing in many of these markets. So there is no rule of thumb with this in a practical sense. If you're listening in various parts of the country, you're going to have rules of thumb for your local area, but that's where it gets super nuanced with this. So I think that's also a trick question. And the answer is, how little house can I buy? What's the smallest amount I can pay to meet my basic lifestyle needs and wants, and really get critical about eliminating all of the surplus there, all of the waste that I'm not really going to enjoy, because every extra bit I spend on housing is going against my freedom level.
Awesome. Love it. Yep. It's always, there's other variables to consider. So with that in mind, let's come back to rent versus buy and really talk about those variables, that nuance. You mentioned two of them in passing. I'm sure there's more, but it sounds like time and location is probably one of the first ones. And then I also heard appreciation. Can you share with us kind of the variables that you would consider, Scott, when doing that rent versus buy analysis?
Yeah, well, I think time is going to be the biggest one, what your appreciation rate is going to be, and what you can do to force that appreciation, which brings us back to exit strategies. Can I increase the value of the property sooner, which brings my break-even point to better? Because the question is, do I rent versus buy? Which is less expensive for me, not which is the better investment, right? The less expensive option is going to largely depend on your timeline for holding the property and the other nuances around how much it costs to rent in your city, how much it costs to buy. Also, in some places like San Francisco or New York, it's just prohibitively expensive to buy. You may not be able to qualify for a property that you'd want to live in to purchase. And so there's like some factors that are kind of more obvious around those types of decisions in some of those areas.
Hey, Mindy, when I asked the question to Scott about, the rule of thumb for like a number of years, he pushed back certainly on the timeline question, saying wisely that, hey, you living in it is very distinct from how long you own that property, right? And you could potentially rent it. So I guess my question to you is more not from the numbers side, but just from the psychological side of that intersection between the home that you want to live in and also on the front side of this, when you're not thinking about renting it necessarily, or most people are not thinking about renting it, also looking at the rental characteristics, right? Because so there's a continuum here. This is not just a straight, hey, this is the best rental property. It meets the bigger pockets, 1% rule, et cetera. So talk me through that intersection.
I think that Scott is trying to encourage you to make the smartest choice and think outside of your own needs. Think outside of your immediate living in the property idea, because for a lot of first-time homebuyers, they're buying it for themselves to live in. And I don't know about you, but my first house was a condo. It had 2 bedrooms. It had a super high HOA fee, which then doubled the next month that I lived in there. And that's another story for another day. But it didn't serve my current needs. And I knew I wasn't going to be there forever. But I also never even considered renting it out. Or, I fixed it up because it was horrible, because it's all I could afford. But I didn't even look at what else could have been a possibility. So the intersection of what do I need versus how can I rent it out, that's really easy to look at. You've got, God, I almost bought my house before the internet was invented. That's how old I am. But now you've got Craigslist and Zillow and Redfin and all these different places that you can, Facebook Marketplace, you can find a rental almost anywhere. So if you just take a little bit of time and start looking for, what's being rented out. Oh, look, this horrible house that backs up to the train tracks that has 1 bathroom and 2 bedrooms has been on the market forever. Maybe that's not so desirable. Whereas this other place in this really neat little neighborhood that has an HOA with a pool and a park and basketball courts and tennis courts and all these things, those houses get snapped up instantly when they're being rented out. So doing a little bit of research will really help you see what people are looking for. In general, people want more than 1 toilet. So don't buy a house that only has 1 bathroom. People want space for multiple people to live with them. So a family is going to rent out a 3-bedroom house versus a 2-bedroom house more frequently. And of course, these are all generalizations, but a 3-bedroom house can have more people, or it can have a home office. I don't know if you know this, but there's a little bit of a pandemic going on right now, and people are looking for more space. There's actually a lot of stories in the news media about how people are leaving the cities and going to the suburbs because they can spread out. Their kids have a place to play, like in the backyard, where they don't have to come into contact with other kids. So, more space is going to generally be better. Now, weird is always a 4-letter word in real estate. So you don't want some 9-bedroom house, because nobody wants a 9-bedroom house. But a 3 or 4-bedroom house is not weird. 5 and above starts to get a little bit strange. So the intersection of what do you want versus what can you rent out, you really need to do a little bit of research. And I think the overarching theme of this book is don't just decide you're going to buy a house today and then put an offer in tomorrow. That's not a smart financial maneuver. So do some research, spend some time figuring out exactly what you want, and go from there.
Well, I think this really sets us up. We've what I hope people have come away with right now is, oh yeah, there's some variables that I probably either should have considered when I purchased my last one, or now I know they need to be on the radar as we purchase our next one or our first one. But really, all of this has just been to say there is a way to do this right, to optimize this. And then the question that poses is, and I guess, Scott, I'll send this to you. If someone is listening to this either as a first-time buyer or a second-time buyer with regrets about last time, how do I get a great deal?
Yeah, well, for this, I want to add one thing on to the last part of the discussion here, where there's 3 options here. It's not live in it or rent it. It's, hey, there's 3 things that will happen after you buy your home, most likely for most people. 1, you're going to continue living there happily until the day you move out or sell it. The second is you're going to leave and you're going to put a renter in place, short-term or long-term. Or the third is you're going to sell it. And your choice you have there is, am I going to live in a place that's going to make me miserable? Am I going to live in a place there, if I rented it out, I would lose money every month? Am I going to live in a place where if I try to sell it, I have a high chance of losing money? The more true the positive ends of those outcomes are, the happier I am living in it, the more I can rent it out with cash flow or break even, and the better chance I have of selling it at a gain, the better off I am. So those things are all going to be in conflict during your decision-making process, and you have to decide how far along the spectrum you're willing to go on each one of those three things. The more true all three things are, the better off you are, and the better odds of your success you have. The less true, the worse off you are. And what sadly I think most people do is they don't even think about those other two possibilities. They just go into the purchase like, I like this house, I'm going to buy, and I call it the buy and pray method, and pray it goes up in value so that it goes up enough over the time I'm living in it for me to sell it at a profit. That is, I think, the framework within that. And so if you can keep those three things in mind, then I can answer your question about good deal, because I think it ties in directly to defining what a good deal is and going after it.
It does. And I want to give you the chance to actually answer the question I asked the first time, but I think I've noticed there's a little intermediate question here, and it's an observation. Maybe Mindy, you can tackle this as well. I know that myself as a first-time home buyer, we did not do this, but we were tempted to start looking for our forever home. And I'm curious because talking about his big three that he just mentioned, the forever home doesn't always accommodate all three of those variables in the correct quadrant. And I'm just curious, what would be your assessment of that first-time home buyer that has in mind a forever home?
It's a really great idea, and the chances of you not moving is almost zero. I realize that my experiences are different than most people's, but until I just sold a house a couple of weeks ago, until I sold that house, I had never lived in a house for more than 5 years in my whole life. And we never moved into a house expecting to sell it super soon as a kid. As an adult, yeah, I've done that all the time. But this concept of a forever home is really, I think, boy, I could get into hot water here. I think it's a bunch of garbage. It's not going to be your forever home. When you're 20, you can't afford the same house that you can afford when you're 50, in theory. When you're 20, you don't necessarily have kids and a husband, and you don't need so much space. Why would you buy a 3,000 square foot house when you're 20 on the off chance that you're going to stay in the same place, maybe stay in the same job, marry somebody who will then move in with you, have kids, and be able to then fill out the 3,000 square foot house? It just doesn't make sense. And I think it's this fairy tale that's being sold to people, and it isn't really realistic.
Well, it seems to me that it's misaligned incentives as well, right? Which is what you guys allude to in the book, which is everybody wants you to buy the largest and most expensive home that you possibly can because they make the most money out of it, right? From the lenders to the agents to the contractors putting in your beautiful forever home kitchen and et cetera, right? This is a case of misaligned incentives coming up with and against reality, which, like you said, most people are not going to live in their home for even probably 10 years, not less 30, 40, 50 years, right? So I think to me, what I've gleaned from this conversation most so far is increasing that zone of awareness, as we call it, just being aware of these things when you go in. And if it's at least somewhere in your mindset, then okay, I remember Scott and Mindy told me to look out for this, that, and that. And there's huge value to me just in that alone. So yeah, it's just, again, it's expanding that zone of awareness. So I love that.
Hey, this is Andrew from the Choose FI team. Hope you're enjoying the interview. We're going to get right back to it right after these quick messages.
And to get it back to you, Scott, it really is important to address that up front, to say part of the good deal is recognizing where we are in our financial journey, by recognizing that the forever home really is not an ideal target for this first home buyer experience, and recognizing for all the reasons we probably won't be here. By not focusing on this early, we're going to have more assets that when we are in the place to get the one, we'll have a better idea of what we want. So now, what is the lifestyle we want? What are the accommodations we need? And then we can really focus on the better question, which to you, and give it right back to you, how do I get a great deal without being saddled with the baggage that comes with the forever home? So I just wanted to kind of touch on that and then give it back to you to help us strategize the second piece.
That's right. That's what we have. There's three parts to this. There's a strategy, which is several $100,000, maybe $1 million question if you kind of can zoom out and think about the consequences of the decision and all the options and the fact that, hey, am I really buying my forever home or am I buying myself a prison for the next 30 years or at least the next 10 or 15? And so that's the major question that you're answering. The second one, the $25,000 question, is how do I get a good deal versus what else is on the market? And then the $2,000 question is the water heater going to have to be replaced after inspection? And everybody worries about them in the reverse order, I think, around that. We certainly talk about the water heater and all those kinds of things in inspection because they can be the 10 or 20, but those are the details around the closing process and those types of things. So anyways, good deal. Great. Once I figured out, I'm going to assess where in that spectrum I lie across those three outcomes and how I want to maximize that, right? Live in it forever, rent it out, short or long term after I move out, or sell for profit, doing work or letting the market carry me. Once I decide what I want to do there, I need to get crystal clear on what I want. Sounds very simple, but it's the step that a lot of people skip. What do I want? I want 3 beds, 2 baths. I want X amount of square feet. I want a 2-car garage. I want these neighborhoods. I'm willing to pay more on this edge of that neighborhood and less on that edge of that neighborhood, right? And that's a several hour. This is not a 200-hour activity, but it's a 25-hour activity to get set up to buy your first home and kind of figure out what you want, get your spouse on board, all those types of questions. Once I know what I want, the second thing is I got to figure out, great, what's the price range for that? And am I living in fairy land?
I didn't know how you were going to complete that sentence. I wasn't sure.
Land. Yeah. So, yeah.
Fairyland sounds cool.
Am I in Fantasyland, right? That's the one I was looking for, right? So how do I do that, right? When I pull up the listings right now in 2021 and I look at what's for sale in Denver, I look at the active listings. Active listings are, properties are selling in just a matter of days. They'll go under contract, they'll go on the market, and they'll go right off. So if you're looking at active listings, that means most likely you're either looking at the 1 or 2 properties that have come on the market in the last 2 days, or you're looking at the properties that are very overpriced or something's horribly, horribly wrong with them, which is incredibly discouraging to you as a first-time home buyer. So how do I get around that and determine what's realistic for me to purchase? I don't even click the filter for what's active. I uncheck that box and I look at what's sold on Zillow or what with my agent in the last 180 days. Properties that have sold within the last 180 days are what's actually going on in your market. And I refine my search, my criteria, my price range until I've got maybe 10 properties that have sold in the last 180 days that I would have bought, I drive past them or whatever, barring something horribly wrong with the foundation or roof or something in inspection, right? And if you can nail that, now you know that what you want exists and is realistic.
And this was like one of the most massive eye-opening things. I've never done that reverse filter that you just did. Although sometimes, your real estate agent will bring you comps. But as a searcher myself, just because you use this example, and I really want to make sure people latch on this. Let's say there were 10 homes on the market originally, and you have homes at 325, 350, 375, 400, 425, and 450. And then all the homes up to maybe 375 are gone, have sold. And so when you log in, you just see homes at 400, 425, and 450. And the home at 400 or 425, you pick the 425 house and you're saying, look at that. I think I got a great deal because there's a home listed at 450. Is that like...
Bingo.
Yeah.
That's the big mistake. That's the mistake many people make. The price for that home is $350 to $399 in that case, right? You're overpaying at 400, but that's what you think is the good deal in your market. And so you buy that one thinking it's a good deal. But if you just do this is not a hard exercise. Like Zillow or any of your local MLSs will allow you to figure this out in seconds to kind of take a look at that. And you have to spend a few hours, like I mentioned, digesting that and looking at the properties and thinking through them. But it's not like this is like a time-consuming endeavor, and it can avoid so much risk in your distorted view of the market that you're going to get when you look at the active listings.
This can be another way to screen agents because as Scott was talking, I opened up my MLS that I have access to and I started clicking all the things that he's saying. And I got listings before he was done talking. And granted, I've heard his discussion before, so I knew where he was going with it. But it isn't that hard to get this information. And if you're reached out to an agent and they're unwilling to do this for you, that's a great way to cross them off the list because your agent should be able to do a modest amount of work for you to help you make a smart financial choice.
Yep.
Well, let's talk about that actually. So we're gonna come back to the idea of incentive alignment. Mindy, I know you are an agent, and just generally looking at that, like not all agents are created equal. Most of us will work with an agent, but there's a huge disparity in the quality of services rendered. And so I think we should probably spend a little bit of time talking about incentive alignment, what to look for and what to avoid at all costs when working with an agent. How do you parse that? Either of you want to grab it and run?
I got one thing though. I'm like halfway through my rant. We haven't finished about how to get a good deal quite yet.
You want
We
you
come
want
back
to
to
parse
that.
it here? We are not done with a good deal. You're not losing. I know you have more tips to come.
All right. I'm excited. I got more things. All
Just
right,
bookmark your
let's go
spot,
to
my
agents.
friend. Let's not walk away
right.
from the agent right now.
So for the agent, there's a lot of questions that you should be asking your agent, and you should absolutely interview your agent before you decide to work with them, because they are helping you make a most likely hundreds of thousands of dollars decision and purchase. And you need to have somebody who's on your side, who is looking out for you. But the way that agents are incentivized is not necessarily in alignment with your values. I get more money the more house I sell to you. And that's not necessarily the best financial choice for you. I feel that I am a different kind of agent because I'm not pushing you into something that is going to benefit me the most. I'm still getting a whole lot of benefit out of being your agent. And I think that you need to connect with somebody who is really going to be considerate of what you want. I am so frankly terrified of helping somebody and having them go around and say, wow, I had a terrible experience. I didn't feel like she helped me at all. Oh my goodness. I never want to work with somebody like that. I'm like, I never want somebody to have that impression of their experience with me. I'm word vomiting all over my clients. Here's information and more information and more information. And you are the most informed person about the process.
Can you imagine
because
working
I
with Mindy
want
as a
you-
real estate agent? Just quick plug real quick. Can you imagine the amount of sheer data that you would have to look at?
Once I figure out what you're looking for, as soon as it comes on the market, here you go. Here's just a bunch of everything. And, I think you should work with me exclusively, but I'm not licensed in all 50 states. So you need to find somebody who you feel comfortable with. First of all, don't just drive by a sign in somebody's yard and call them up and be like, hey, would you be my agent? I bet they say yes, because it's not. Boy, I don't want to throw agency under the bus because there is a lot of moving parts that you don't see from the front end, but it's not that hard either. So find somebody. And how many agents do you know? Everybody and their mom is an agent right now. Hey, Scott, are you an agent?
I am. I don't really represent any clients in years, but yeah, that's the.
But everybody is. And how many agents do you know? Brad, if you were going to sell your house today, which one of your 17 agent friends would you use to list your house? Everybody knows an agent. So it's easy to find somebody to interview. Find somebody and interview them. And if they don't have the good answers, if it sounds like they're making stuff up, if they're too busy for you, when you're interviewing them, imagine how they're going to be when they're, juggling a bunch of clients. I've got like 6 or 8 clients right now in various stages of the process. And I still have time for them, or I tell them point blank, I don't have time for you. I can send you to somebody else who does have time for you. But ask questions and get the answers that you understand before deciding to work with somebody.
And since we're talking about first-time home buyers here, so when Scott was talking about those massive expenses, certainly on the sell side, right? There's the commissions on the sell side, but on that first-time home buying side, is there any good reason for somebody to not have a buyer's agent that you can think of? Or is that an absolute slam dunk? It doesn't cost you anything because the seller's paying it. Is that the advice to a first-time home buyer, is get a good agent? End of story. Or, I guess there's always some bizarro instance,
Maybe.
but for 99% of people, is that a pretty much rule of thumb?
Remember, the seller usually, in most cases, is paying the commissions for both the listing and buyer agent. And so really, I think, look, there's no such thing as a slam dunk in life. There's always exceptions. But yeah, like if you're buying your first home, you probably should use an agent, almost certainly, unless there's something about your specific situation, like you are an agent, or you've consumed 1,000 hours of real estate investing content and know that what you're doing about this, and feel like you might get an advantage out of there. But very rare cases will it be practical for someone
Right.
to probably not use a buyer agent in to represent them.
So I have a friend who's looking to buy a first-time home. I can say with relative confidence, 98+%, get an agent, right?
I think that's very reasonable. I'd agree with that.
I'm going to go a little bit further and say, unless your friend is buying it from his parents who have owned it since the dirt was put down there, they need an agent because they're a first timer. Like I said, there's a lot of moving parts that you don't know about. And it's really easy to make a very expensive mistake when you don't have somebody in your corner helping guide you through the process.
All right, so we're going to get this back to Scott on how to get a good deal here, but I would just want to talk about just two variables that we've briefly touched on here. And so obviously we just talked about, get an agent, get a great agent. And then two, change that filter tab when you're doing your searches. You don't care about active listings. You care about what things sold for over a window that you've predetermined, whether it be 180, 60 days, 90 days, whatever that window you predetermined. What were they actually selling for? You don't care about what isn't selling. You want to know what's competitive for this market. So that's two. Scott, back to you. Interview an agent. And I will just add on to this. You guys give a lot of great tips in the book. I know we said interview your agent, but people say, well, what questions do I ask? This book has an entire chapter dedicated to how to find a great agent and what qualities and characteristics you would look for. So, if that was your then follow-up question, it's covered in this book. We won't go much farther there on that. Scott, how to get a great deal.
Yeah, you've determined what you want and whether or not that exists at your price range or is generally speaking selling on a somewhat frequent basis. Now you have to set yourself up to go fishing rather than going hunting. I guess I don't know if that's the right analogy, but something like that, right?
Yeah.
I am now waiting for a prop. I know generally speaking what I'm going to look for. I don't know what specifically is going to come on the market, but I know what I'm looking for in a general area, and my agent has set me up with a search so that I get pinged every time a property that meets my criteria comes on the market. So it's 2:30 on Thursday, and that 3-bedroom, 2-bath with the garage in that neighborhood at that price point comes on the market, is listed. I am canceling my evening plans, and I'm setting up a world in which I can cancel my evening plans and go drive to that property, maybe even view it that night. I'm set up with my lender. I'm pre-approved or pre-qualified, ready to go to make an offer. And my agent is on speed dial, so I know that I'm ready to make an offer that day or the next day on that property. I'm not making a rush decision, but I'm making an instantaneous decision because I've made the decision in a cool, calm, and collected period way ahead of time. And now I'm just waiting to hook the line on that property, right? And so how do I set myself up for that in a general basis? Well, a big mistake people make is they're like, oh, my lease expires on June 30th. Therefore, I need to buy a property before June 30th. No, you're not going to do that. You cannot rush a $400,000 or $500,000 decision in order to avoid paying $150 a month in month-to-month rent or moving in somewhere, short term while you continue your search. The stakes are just too high to justify paying a few $100s a month or something like that, or delaying your search or living somewhere short term so that you can make a really good decision. That's a $10,000 error that you could make or overpayment or get something that doesn't quite meet your criteria with that. So it's setting yourself up for a position to go fishing and then reacting instantaneously when what you've already predetermined you want to buy comes on the market.
Well, give me a solution for that then. So I agree with the logic. Like it's really, my lease ends at the end of this month. So, I have to buy a new house. Like that's a very expensive, decision point. How do we strategize that? How do we optimize that so we take that limiting belief off the table?
Call your landlord and ask if you can go month to month when your lease expires for an extra $100, $150 a month, or sign another lease, but say I'll sign it for another year, but I want to be able to sublet the apartment when I move out. If that's the case, to somebody who meets your criteria or whatever, right? Like landlords 9 times out of 10 are going to accept some version of this for a fee, but that fee is probably, even if it's $1,000, the odds of you getting a much better deal on your $500,000 decision are just so great. That's 0.2% of the purchase price of a $500,000 property. If it's $1,000, in most cases, it's going to be a few $100. Just put yourself in a position 6 months ahead of time. Start thinking about this where, hey, how am I going to be when I'm ready to go searching? I'm not going to be in a rush decision with this, or I've got a really comfortable band around this to be flexible, because it's just, you can't. Otherwise, you're going to fall into that trap that we discussed of buying the $400,000 property because it's the best one on the market at the time, but it's still a bad deal.
Now, I'm curious, this book is really framed around first-time home buyers, which, that makes sense. We're talking about someone that was a dependent, or we're talking about someone that was renting that's now purchasing their first home. What about the individual that maybe has a home now? Maybe their home has sold, they have a closing date coming up, they have this hard deadline that potentially they have to be out, maybe they have a work scheduled move, et cetera. They have some sort of externally imposed deadline in their mind. Do you have kind of a general like strategy that you kind of personally would look at for my options in terms of, well, don't feel like you have to do this if it's going to be a 50 grand mistake to purchase this month instead of next month? How would you personally strategize that?
Well, first, I'd sign a month-to-month lease somewhere if I'm going to move into a new area. If I don't own a property, I'm going to move, and I'm moving to a new place. I'm going to probably figure out a way to sign a month-to-month lease or have enough lead time to have really good odds of making this decision ahead of time in a cool, calm, and collected way, like I discussed earlier. As far as the specific tips and strategies for buying your second home, that will be in our upcoming book, Second Time Home Buyer, coming out near. Just kidding.
We got you covered. You got just wait a couple months. Fifth time home buyer, lessons learned the fourth time around. Yeah, 2023 edition.
We will follow you for life here, but I think that comes down to follow the exit strategies thing up front, right? Because what you don't want to find yourself in and a $50,000, I'm making this up, but a huge stakes decision is, hey, I got a new job in another city. It's better pay by a good amount. If I was renting, it'd be a no-brainer. But because I own my place and it doesn't make sense as a rental and I wouldn't recoup all of my down payment and I'd have to make a rush decision on buying my next place, that job opportunity doesn't make sense. That's the prison that I was mentioning earlier. If you make that decision up front on the first time purchase without thinking through these exit strategies, you may want to buy your forever home and then you get a great job in a city 800 miles away, opportunity that disrupts everything and changes it. And you can't take that opportunity if your exit options stink right now with your current home. That's a brutal fact that we just have to kind of throw out there, right? So how do you set yourself up with the right exit options up front so you don't find yourself in this situation is the first thing. And then when you make the buying decision, find a way to live temporarily for a few months while you conduct your search. That's worth the tens of thousands of dollars advantage you're likely to accrue by being able to find that property that meets your exit criteria correctly, I think.
Okay, Scott is making up numbers, but I actually have real life numbers that I got from my client yesterday.
Nice.
She said, am I better off signing a new lease for 3 or 6 months? And I said, well, is there a price difference? She said, it is $1,750 a month for a 12-month lease. It's $1,977 for a 6-month lease and $2,104 for a 3-month lease. So when you look at that and you're saying, wow, that's $300 a month more, $350 a month more if I only sign a 3-month lease. Yeah, but then you're getting out of a $50,000 mistake by paying $300 a month more for 3 months. So you're trading $900 for $50,000. I think that's a pretty good deal.
Well, it only has to be $1,000. You have to make $1,000 better decision on your home for that to pay off, right? Everything above that. And I bet you that your rush decision will cost you a lot more than that if you're forced into something, because there's some nuances that just don't quite work with the purchase that what you would be allowed to get if you could make a more patient decision. So thank you, Mindy. That was awesome.
Nice. So rush decision. This is actually highly pertinent, I think, for a lot of real estate markets around the country. I know you said the Denver area. I know here in Richmond, this is an extraordinarily hot, quote unquote, real estate market. I know a friend of mine who put their house up for sale 2 weeks ago. They got 80 showings in one weekend. They had 80 showings and 25 offers. So, put that aside. For the home buyer, what are the do's and don'ts in a hot real estate market when that FOMO is real, right? I know, Scott, this doesn't go into the numbers, but for a lot of people, that type of FOMO, it's there, and I think then if you look into the numbers, maybe the rent versus buy, maybe the rent side looks a lot more attractive all of a sudden, right? So I would love this, again, for me, is the intersection of psychology and numbers. And I'd love for you guys to kind of weigh in on that.
So I am in this market as an agent and I have lots of clients. I'm getting real good at writing offers because I'm one of those 24 offers that didn't get your friend's house. And, one of 8 offers that lost out to something. We went $20,000 over asking and it sold for $58,000 over asking. And I thought our $20,000 over asking was a bit high. This market is not a normal market. And what we're currently in March, April, May of 2021 is not going to continue forever. It can't. I mean, think about it. Your friend just put his house on the market and got 80 showings. If you're even thinking about buying or selling a house right now, it could be a really great time to list it, especially if you've got one of those dog houses or like hard to sell houses. It's on a busy street. It backs up to a train tracks. It's got a weird layout. It's this bunch of bedrooms and bathrooms. Everything is selling right now.
Great time to sell a weird house. That's what you're saying, right?
It is a great time to sell a weird house. And it is not the right time to fall in love with the house, because then you're making an emotional decision that gets you to overpay significantly for a house. And I hear people yelling at the radio right now, well, a house is worth what anybody will pay for it. I get that from my husband all the time. I'm like, yeah.
Damn it, Carl.
You can find somebody to overpay for any house. I mean, they're never the houses that I'm selling, but you can find somebody to overpay, and you are up against people who are not under the same financial mentality, financial constraints as you are. You're up against people who are playing by a whole different set of rules in many cases. You could be up against a corporation. You could be up against an investor who has in the middle of a 1031 exchange and has a tight timeline and has to buy something. You could be up against somebody who's investing from overseas, who is just trying to find a safe place to park their money. So when you are the buyer in this current ridiculously hot market, make an offer that makes sense to you based on the numbers that you've run, the intelligent, calm decisions that you're making. And if you lose the house, it wasn't meant to be. There's always going to be a house for somebody to find down the road. I have a 100% success rate.
Yeah, I also think if you have 10 deals that have sold in the last 180 days, you know how they're going to come on there, and you can be willing to lose a few of them with that. So yes, there's the logic of, I think you're absolutely right, the psychology and the logic of the decision, right? Or what was the term you used? Psychology and intersection of psychology and
finance.
I wish I could remember.
Numbers. Yeah. I think that's a great framework, but you can move more towards the numbers by doing the homework ahead of time, knowing what you think is the offering price and knowing that there's always going to be another one that comes on the market next time. And then the second thing is I rent right now. I conducted this whole analysis and I decided, even writing this book, first time homebuyer, to rent right now because I don't think I'm going to live in the property that long. I'm not willing to take on the risk associated with, hacking a situation where I'm buying like a $2 million quadplex or something, because it's just too much risk for me to assume. So I just decided to pay rent because I think that it's a cheaper way to fund my lifestyle right now than buying in the current conditions for what I want right now.
That's amazing. I mean, this is for first-time homebuyers, but it gives you the logic to then, if you are in there's always going to be an option, but this gives you the Venn diagram to be able to go through those and say, it might not be what I came into this with. And if you can just rip away that idea that your first-time home is going to be your forever home, that's the part that's screwing you over. That is the part, because you already had this idea. If you can then go with a more mercenary, and this is really important, nobody wants you to live in a basement. I know there are individuals in this space that have done remarkable financially by choosing to live in a basement. But if you're listening to this episode is not trying to convince you to do that. It is trying to convince you to get a house that you are a home, a place to live that you love, that meets all of the needs that you want for your life that you're building. But not to conflate that with a place that you're going to be living or be stuck for the next 40 or 50 years, right? If you can just make that slight line of delineation, this is a much more practical and grounded approach to crushing it and either minimizing, the financial burden of his home, or maybe even looking at it from a place at some point of profit. All right, everyone. Highly recommend this book. It's going to be valuable for you if you have a dependent or a friend or family member, someone that's going to be going through this mental process, and you want to make sure this becomes a financial blessing and not a financial anchor or curse. This book will speed up their learning process very, very quickly. It's fun, it's engaging, it's practical. And honestly, this early on in life, this is maybe, other than your student loan debt, this is the biggest financial decision that a first-time homebuyer person that's in that place is making. So it's worth just spending a little bit of time thinking about it. For more information or pick up your copy, just go to biggerpockets.com/FTHB. That's biggerpockets.com/FTHB. Scott and Mindy, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thanks for having us. It was a lot of fun.
I'm so excited to talk to you guys. This was excellent. Thank you.
Absolutely. Brad, I think being a part of the financial independence community and looking at the numbers, most of us we have a little bit of an anchor to protect ourselves against this idea that, a home is a great investment. We do tend to look at, there's a little bit more balance, like, we need a great place to live. And that has a lot of different variables, but we don't think about it as, necessarily a great investment, or certainly not as our only investment. Now there's people on all spectrums here, and I'm not putting anybody in a box, but I just think that, the earliest version of that, we might get a fantastic home, but we're not necessarily just locked into some of those, early pitfalls that we discussed at the beginning of the episode. But I would say that very few people, myself included, have the framework that they have in this book. And I would imagine that with that framework, I would have so many more exit strategies. I would have so much more confidence about how, when I leave that first home to maybe go get my forever home, like it would actually be adding to my financial game plan going forward if I'd had the content that was in this book.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. I think that framework, that kind of ties into what I was saying with that increased zone of awareness, right? Just having the comprehension that these factors, they are out there and they matter, right? And it's not just, this is the whole financial independence movement in a microcosm, right? Which is what you've always heard isn't necessarily the end of the story, right? And there might be a more optimized way to do it than to just follow blindly. Oh, buying a home is the American dream. Buying a home is your biggest investment, right? That may be true in certain small instances, like Mindy, for instance. Mindy does this in a very optimized way. And Mindy and Carl have undoubtedly made many hundreds of thousands of dollars from this very intentional set of decisions. Most of us are not making very intentional decisions when it comes to the home we live in. And I think a book like this just opens up that zone of awareness, not to sound trite and repeated, but to what you should be considering, what you even can consider as options. And when you have options, then it allows you to have that mental framework to succeed, plain and simple. You might ultimately make the same decision you were going to, and that's fine. Just like we always say here at Choosify, I don't care what decision you ultimately make. I just care that you think about it and that you're intentional. And this book allows for that intentionality. It gives you the toolbox you need. So plain and simple, this book is essential.
All right, my friends, go to biggerpockets.com/FTHB for more information on that book. The fire is ready, my friends. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.
If this episode was helpful to you, don't forget to subscribe. If you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your friends about us. We can be found on Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere you listen to podcasts. While you're there, don't forget to check out our other shows like Everyday Courage with Jillian Johnsrud and Rebel Entrepreneur with Alan Dalnigan. If you would like a free bite-sized course to jumpstart your financial independence, check out Choosify.com/challenge. Choosify is produced by Andrew Mendonca and Zachary Tan and is a production of Choosify Media Incorporated. Choosify.com is managed by Annie Sheely with William McVeigh, MK Williams, Melissa Lagerquist, Liz Kessler, Stephen Hettig, Kelly Black, and Jennifer Ma. And Ed T is our CEO. Thanks for listening.